I miss making movies a little bit. I don't think about it a lot, but I made a small movie for my last book, like a 10-minute documentary. And I found it when we were shooting, it's very natural. Like things came very naturally to me and it was easy. And I was just naturally a director. But the beautiful thing about books is, and the thing I hated about movies is you spent 90% of your time trying to make a movie as opposed to actually doing the creative thing. And that was frustrating. Whereas opposed to books, you know, I can do that 100% of the time. And the difference is, if I wanted to write a scene where there were 10,000 people charging over a hill, you know, if that was going to be a movie, it would take about 5 months to organize and cost millions of dollars and thousands of extras or CGI, all kinds of complicated things. Or I could just sit down and write that scene and hand it to you and you will immediately see it in your head. And to me, I have so many stories to tell that it's a matter of time, and I'd rather move quickly than sit around waiting. I am in the process now of talking to other people about making movies out of my stories, which is kind of the best of both worlds, I think. So I can continue doing this, and then they'll hopefully end up being a movie. Who else had a question? Dan, go ahead. Was there any particular writer that inspired me? I'm really inspired by a lot of writers, not so much from their writing, but who they are as people. I've been fortunate enough to become friends with a lot of really great writers. And what always impresses me is how open they are. And even though in the beginning I held them, you know, like way up here, like they were gods, they immediately accepted me when I first started as equal to them. And in fact, when I saw when they worked with students who were writers, they treated them as equals too. And I was like, oh, okay, you know. So I was really inspired by how open and how giving they were, and how much they were giving back, you know. And so that inspires me all the time. And also how they approach their craft, you know, the dedication to it. Yeah, so I'm constantly inspired by the people. One of the reasons is, as a writer, I can't read fiction while I'm writing other people's fiction, because if I read a really great book, that style starts to creep into my writing because it's so great. And so I just don't read while I'm writing, and because I'm writing all the time, I don't get to read a lot of fiction. So I'm trying to keep it pure. You have a question? Which book did I have the most fun writing? Well, this last book, True and Nell, was based on a real story. When I stumbled across the real life adventures of these two kids, they were so outrageous and so funny. You know, they read like fiction. And so I had a lot of fun just because the material was so fun. And it was so good. I had so much fun doing it. I wanted to do it again, so I wrote a second book, which I just finished a couple weeks ago. But every book is a different experience, you know, so every book has different feelings associated with it. Right. She's asking about collaboration in the writing process. Well, I will tell you for a fact that I would not be the writer I am today were it not for my writers groups. So I, in the beginning particularly, had different groups of writers, critique groups, that we would share our work with every week or every other week. And what I learned from it is that, you know, I can see other people working through a novel from scratch all the way to finish, and I could see it before I did it, and see like, well, they're just people like me, there's nothing special about them, and they've managed to do it, so it kind of made it less intimidating. But also they were of great support, because you need feedback when you're writing. And the reason is, when you write, you have kind of a movie playing in your head. And the reason a story doesn't work is because you might hand it to somebody else and they see a different movie because you haven't communicated your story clearly enough, and so they've reinterpreted it. And so they might be reacting to a totally different story than you think you're telling. So to me, the biggest part of rewriting is all about clarity and clarifying your vision till any reader you can hand that book to and they will see the same movie that's playing in your head. So feedback is really vital. And my relationship with my editors are pretty amazing. I mean, every single time they've made the book, way better than I thought it could be. And it's kind of like, it's this back and forth where they challenge it to go higher this way, and I come back with this, and then it, keeps building higher and higher until it becomes, much better than I thought. And particularly when I work with an illustrator too, it's exciting because, my job is not to tell them what to do, but to just hand them the final story and let them experience it. And they will often come back with a vision that's different than mine and surprising. And they see things that I don't see because I'm buried in it. And so that freshness, those fresh eyes are really important. And the combination of those two visions working together is really exciting to me. So I'm always up for collaboration. Yes? Yes, it does. You can drive it. There's a driver sitting behind it. It gets very poor gas mileage, so it's... Is there anybody I've run into that I want to write about, but they won't let me? I haven't had that. The thing about what I do is, a lot of the people and places I've read about are, if they're a public record, then it's safe. And a lot of things I'm trying to write with, with a real understanding and a lot of love, so there's nothing slanderous about what I'm writing about. Or I'm trying to take a negative situation and spin it into a positive situation. So I haven't really had an issue. Sometimes they don't, like if I'm writing about a famous person, they might not want to be involved because they just don't like people writing about them. It's not that they don't like what you've written, they just don't like the idea of it. And so sometimes it's better not to have them involved. But I try to do something that they would feel good about at least, or is truthful. So I haven't had that issue yet. Yes. Right, do I collaborate with my illustrators? I collaborate with some, like this one guy, Jesse Watson, who I've done a couple books with, and we're working on a new book now, and we kind of came up with the same idea at the same time separately, and we started talking. So we're, instead of, usually the artist comes in after the story is totally locked down and finished. Now we're starting like from the beginning together, and we're talking about it, even before I've taken it to a publisher, to an editor. So we're kind of hashing it out together and seeing how that goes. So it'll be interesting, unusual. But since I used to do a lot of art when I was younger, I know what's helpful for an artist and what's not helpful. So I have an unusual relationship with my artists that most writers don't have because of that. So normally a writer never gets to talk to the illustrator, like they just keep them apart. But I always, have discussions, but it's always trying to be helpful rather than putting demands on them. Okay. Right here in the middle. Right. So once I figure out a story I want to tell, how do I do research for it? So what happens, I'll talk about Ghetto Cowboy. What happens is, I see this world, it's so unique. I know it'd be a great place to set a story. There was nothing written about it. Like it was totally unknown. I just had these photographs, I knew where the place was. I also knew I couldn't just walk in there and say, hey, I want to write a story about you guys. It was a pretty tough neighborhood, so I knew I had to kind of earn my way in. So what I did was I started to troll like these message boards and early bloggers from that area, and just try to find references to horses. And occasionally, there'd be a reference to a horse, there'd be a reference about a person, and as soon as I could figure out who that person was, I could track down that person, mostly online. And then once I talked to them, they would turn me on to somebody else, and then somebody else, and kind of worked my way in closer and closer. And in that process, would hear more and more stories about things that were going on. So by the time I actually got there and showed up in person, I had like hundreds of these amazing little stories and incidents. And my job was to figure out, like, all these stories are great. So how can I fit this all in one book? Like, how can I turn this into a single narrative? Well, the easy way is to have a main character who all these stories happens to, you know. And then it's a matter of like structuring these so they all form an arc for this character. So sometimes it's just a lot of detective work and digging and digging and digging. And that's part of the fun. It's just like discovering all these things that you never knew about. So we're good, we're out of time, so thank you.